right?
Buenos Aires, yes.
Buenos Aires, Argentina. Well, I want to hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today we are here in collaboration with Global Shapers Doha. We are talking with Mr. Juan Pablo Escobar Henao, an architect, author, conference speaker, an ambassador for peace, and also a strong fighter against violence. Welcome, Juan Pablo. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation today.
Thank you very much. It's an honor for me. Thank you.
Now, the honor is all mine. Today we have a public over the world. We are public with over the world. We have friends from Panama, Mexico, Argentina, Qatar, Spain, Chile. I don't know. I will ask all our friends better to send their flags in the comments so we will know from where they are watching us right now. What do you think? I will say, even I would take this moment to say to our friends in Qatar, you know this phrase for sure, Salaam alaikum, right?
Yes, salam.
And Ramadan Kareem to all our friends who are celebrating now the holy month of Ramadan. I'm very happy to have you. Now, as I understand, as you hear me?
Sorry, I lost the connection for 2
Hello?
seconds.
Now you can hear me, right?
I hear you well.
Yeah. As you know, all the world is facing this pandemic problem. So as I heard, as I understood, you faced something similar before. It's a lockdown. We are all in lockdown, but I
Yeah,
think you faced something similar.
yes, in my case, it lasts like for more than a decade. So it was a lot of time hiding, not precisely from a virus, but let's call it the virus of violence, no? The virus of hate. And it was very tough times for me and my family and for Colombia, of course. There was a lot of violence coming from my father's side and also from his enemy's side and from Colombia's government too. So it was very difficult times for everybody, and we stayed home and running at the same time for a long time. Without it, I couldn't open the window because of security reasons. So I know that everybody's suffering because of the virus right now, but we can look a little bit to the past, and maybe we can feel stronger when we can learn from those stories and know that we can overcome this situation, and it will happen sooner than earlier.
Exactly. I hope you are good, your family as well.
Thank God, yes.
And as you say, I hope we can let this in the past soon. Well, we are receiving a lot of flags from different parts of the world, even Turkey. I saw one from Turkey, Qatar, of course, Jordan. That's amazing. And speaking about flags, and speaking about cultures, speaking about countries, and speaking about people, you have two books, two not only two books, two bestseller books translated into more than 16 languages. Am I right?
Yes, you're right. Thank you.
Wow. My Father and Infraganti. Tell us a little bit more about both books. My Father, I think you presented around 2015, maybe in
2014.
Panama? 2014 in
2014 and
Panama.
2015 in Panama, yes.
In Panama. Tell us please a
Well,
little bit.
the first book is called Pablo Escobar, My Father, and perhaps it's a chronological story. And, I talk about the facts that I lived and experienced next to my father. And of course, it was also an investigation about his own life. Surrounding his life, there was a lot of mysteries and myths and a lot of things to discover. So I was trying to share the facts with the public. Telling this kind of stories requires a lot of responsibility because of the effect you can cause on the people. And thank God, so far, everyone that has had the opportunity to read my books, none of them is willing to repeat my father's stories, because now they are very aware of the consequences of trying to do such a thing. So I expect that nobody will dare to repeat his own story because of the consequences of his violence, and consequences that we are still living, today as a family and also as a country, as a society. So perhaps many of the media have portrayed my father as some kind of hero, but I love him very much as his son. But I wanted to write a book about him, just telling the right facts and everything that happened in those times, so people could get a little bit closer to the real stories. And the second book was about, trying to meet with my father's worst enemies, because I wanted to hear the other part, not only the family part, not only some other stories, but, how my father's enemies remember him. And it was the first time that most of them were willing to talk about the past, about the hate, about the violence, about that everything that um, make them face my father in with such a violence in those times. So the second book is about what my father never told me. That's the kind of different stories, the Barry Seal stories, the CIA agent that was killed thanks to sadly to my father's orders in 1986. The guerrillas, the lefty groups, and the right-wing groups, the paramilitaries, politicians, and many other stories that I discovered when I was doing such an investigation about him.
You are 44 years old right now. Am I right?
43.
43. And your father were 43 or 44 when he passed away?
When he passed away, he was 44 years old. And talking about that, my father, perhaps in most of the people remembers him like a success case. And I want to say something, my father couldn't be considered as a success case because he only enjoyed 10% of his life. And I don't think that we should consider a success when you have only the possibility and the chance to enjoy only 10% of your life. I made the maths, of course, that if you watch Narcos on Netflix, you will see him enjoying 90% of his life, but that never happened. That's just Hollywood way of seeing him, or way of portraying him, or glorifying his violence.
You were the last person who talked with your father before he passed away in 1993 by phone, right?
Yes, I was on the phone with him, and he was calling me and the family. He was committing the biggest mistake because he always taught me that I should never use the phone because that will bring death to my family and to myself. And so I was very worried because of he was calling many times and he was staying on the phone for more minutes than he knew that he could. So that's a way of committing suicide, because when you are the most wanted man in the world and you are calling to a hotel where your family is staying, but that hotel belongs to the government and to the military, you already know perfectly well that somebody is going to try to hear you and to try to find you through the telephone line. So he committed the biggest mistake, but I see that as an act of love. And why I'm saying that? Because he understood that there was no option for him to stay alive, and that he wanted to free us. And the only way to do that was, trying to uh, kill himself, because that's what's exactly what he did. He started calling us so the police could find him and trace his call. And after that, he killed himself. So it was a way to free us as a family, because he understood that there was no possibility to live in this world all together because of the consequences of his acts of violence against many people in Colombia and some other parts of the world too.
I don't think I can't, or nobody can't imagine the things you have been passed through. Uh, Juan Pablo Escobar now or Sebastián Marroquín. You even have to change your name, right?
Yes, I was, I legally changed my name in Colombia after a year that we were trying to escape from violence. We asked for the Vatican help, the Red Cross, the United Nations, many people, many ambassadors, but nobody was willing to help. We felt like strangers and aliens in our own planet, because there was no square meter for us to live peacefully. So there was no other chance, and we have to change legally our names because not even the airlines sold tickets to us to escape from violence. There was no judicial things against us, but there was a big prejudice against the family of Pablo Escobar, and it was very hard to escape from that. And the only way out was changing legally our names. We did it we did it legally because, of course, we didn't want to be in trouble. But perhaps it could have been faster to obtain fake passports in those times. But we did it, the right way because we knew that someday somebody will start asking questions about how we change our names, and so we wanted to stay as clean as possible from the past, and it was the only way out. The next day, we could change legally our names, and after we obtained the passports, we could, took a plane without any problem.
Right. Um, I'm sorry for saying it this way, but you are the son of one, if not the most well-known criminal of the whole story. Uh, how would you describe the mind of your father, his personality?
Well, he was a man who who taught me, the how extreme could be a man in terms of violence and at the same time in terms of love. We have to remember that he was called by our former vice president Santos, Francisco Santos. He called him like the Da Vinci of crime, and that will give you a perspective, of how deep was he as a criminal and as a human being at the same time. And sadly, he was using his creativity, his intelligence for violence. And I think that if he could have a little bit more patience and perseverance, he could have been someone else and perhaps even more successful than he was in his golden era. But we should never forget that he had only like 10% of his life living peacefully and very wealthy, but that didn't last much. The only place where I can see my father enjoying life is on Netflix.
Yeah, I saw several pictures with your father everywhere. We can see how close you were. Um, have you father ever told you from where he became into this life, how everything started?
Well, I had some conversations with him, and I remember the first one. He just ordered the killing of the Minister of Justice Rodrigo Lara Bonilla in the year 1984. So we were forced to leave Colombia, and we went to Panama thanks to the protection of General Noriega in those times. And my father called me, and he had a conversation with me. He said, "Look, son, I am a bandit, and I want you to know that this is what I do for a living." So since that very first moment, he didn't have any problem to watch the news with me, read the newspaper, the magazines, and taking responsibility or not for some of the facts and the violence that was portrayed there. So from I was very young when my father started to share with me that he was a criminal. I believe that one of the reasons why he did such a thing was because, if he let the media show how was my dad for me, you know, perhaps I could have the wrong image about him. Because thanks to those conversations and to that kind of trust between us. That gave me a more real perspective about the man he was behind the title of, being the most wanted man in the world, of the Da Vinci of crime, or even the Robin Hood of Colombia. Because, also the media, but those names, they all come from the media. It's not, in some cases, what really happened. When people remember him, they talk to me and they said, but your father did a lot of great things for the poorest people in Colombia. And that could be true, but we should never forget that there was a lot of blood behind his, behind his own money. So, of course, he helped a lot of people, but at the same time, he was living a lot of contradictions. He was building soccer fields for the poorest people so they will never consume drugs, and at the same time he was the biggest drug lord in those times. So a lot of contradiction in his own life, supporting the paramilitary groups and at the same time supporting the lefty groups. So he was like dealing with a lot of trouble at the same time.
I heard a fun story. Maybe you can confirm if it's true, and it's something related with the personality of your father everywhere, about him playing Monopoly.
He was always cheating. He never liked to at all. Not even between his family members. He was a man who was born to win, no matter what, no matter the consequences. I even remember him playing soccer with his bodyguards and everybody, and the game never stops until his team was winning. And so he argued with the referee and with everybody, and nobody could say anything against him. So he didn't have any problems to make even some changes between the teams in the middle of the game, and the game lasts as many times as he wishes. So he never liked to lose, not even if it was in front of his son or whatever. It was like some part of his funny behaviors when he was a drug lord, a big boss.
Did he ever allow you to win?
Well, if I won, it was because I really had all the tools to do it. But he was like always trying to find a way to cheat on, and not to, he never did things legally. Not even playing Monopoly. That's a fact. So when people say, "Oh, your father used to own some soccer teams or some companies," I said to those people, "Hey, my father never had even one single legal business in his own life." So that's a lie. If somebody says to you that Pablo Escobar was the owner of some legal company, that's not true. Never happened.
Did your father ever try to push you to follow his same path?
On the contrary, he was, and I understood this finally. I'm blessed. I am a father now with a 7-year-old kid I have now, and I understood this recently. My father always encouraged me not to follow him. He always encouraged me to study, to be a good man, to have different opportunities. He told me, "Look, son, I wanted to study. I wanted to be an accountant or a lawyer, but I couldn't have the money to do it. So now I can pay you for your study. You should do something else." And I understand now that when you truly love your son, you don't want to leave him and to make him live the same violence, and to make him walk through that path of destruction. So when you truly love your son, you will say to him the best advices you could give as a father, and you will say to him, study, do something else. That's why I became an architect, industrial designer, and I did many other things. And thanks to that education I received, I had many other opportunities to live this life, even in the middle of prejudice, because I have to say, perhaps I have the same talents as another colleague, an architect, but if a family wants to build a house, perhaps they will call the other architect, not me. And why is that? Because I am just, the son of Pablo Escobar. So they want to avoid whatever problems they think, thanks to their prejudice, they will have. for their lives if they hire me, but I have, some other opportunities, and some of the people and families in the world are giving me the opportunities to work and to do something else. So I can understand and I can live with that. It's something that I have to respect.
You know, Juan Pablo, as you know, I'm from Panama. I have the chance, thanks God, because of work, to live in different countries, to have friends from different parts of the world. I'm sure that you have experienced my own experience, where young people, and not only young people, even kids sometimes, when they have the chance to watch this series from this platform on TV.
I, I
we
say
will
without
we
problem.
will we will not give them marketing for free, okay?
They are already using our last name
Yeah,
without
they
asking
need to
for
pay
any
you back.
permission. Yeah,
They
but
should pay you back.
they didn't pay me not even 1 cent.
Well, Juan Pablo, my concern is that when I'm visiting or talking with some friends, uh, I can realize that sadly and unfortunately, kids, young people, they see in the personalities of these drug dealers a heroes. They
Yes,
want to emulate them. So this is why
sadly,
one of the main reasons why I'm so excited to having you here now talking with us is to watching and to understand how you change your legacy. I mean,
well,
you, yeah, I'm sure you are related or you heard about the theory of this scientific Cesar Lombroso. He was speaking about the theory that some people born by genetic with a set of mind to commit crime. So genetically, you born from Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. You grow surrounded by killers, bandits, drug dealers,
yeah, the
and
worst example.
despite all of this, you are here now in front of me, in front of all our friends and followers that are watching us, showing us that doesn't matter where you grow, doesn't matter who is your father. If you decide to do it different and to do it in a different way, you can become, for example, in your case, an architect, author, ambassador for peace. Completely the opposite. How could you explain this and motivate young people who are listening us right now to understand that they are not heroes?
Well, that's something very difficult to understand because the way the media is portraying my father's stories are making him look like some kind of hero, like an anti-system hero or somebody like that. But the ones as me, we live this story. I didn't watch my own story on TV. I was living it, this story, and I have like a tattoo in my soul. I know for sure how this story started and how it ended. So I wouldn't dare to repeat it because I am very sure of the consequences that I would leave to my son, to my family, to my freedom. So, what's the point of having a mansion if you're going to lose your freedom, your family members, your friends? So, when I remember my father's stories, and I'm used to tell this to the kids, to the youngest audience, because they are very open to believe everything they saw on TV. And not everything we can see, it's absolutely the truth. Even if they are selling to you this as the whole truth. So for me, I was visiting my father in very poor villages. But if you see that on Narcos, you will see him hiding in mansions. So everybody likes mansions and everybody wants to stay and to have one or two or 10 mansions, but that never happened. My father, at the same time he was portrayed as one of the richest men in the world by Forbes magazine. You know, he was living like the poorest man on earth. And I can tell you because I was visiting him, he has no AC, no fridge, no food, you know, not even a floor in the house he was hiding. Sometimes not windows, you know, nothing. So I asked myself, what's the point of having such a big amount of money if the cost of that and if the consequence is that it's going to force you to live in absolute poverty? So that's why I said my father didn't take advantage of his own talents and intelligence, because he could have been perhaps a very and even more successful man if he had a little bit more patience and he could, you know, stay in a different path. So I am very aware, you know, there was a story that I remember. I was hiding with my father. It was the last year of his life. And at the same time, there was a $20 million reward for his head and a $4 million reward for my head. But
Wow.
don't get too excited because nobody's going to pay you that much for me now. So, so I remember that we ran out of food, you know, but we had like $4 or $5 million in cash, you know, in the same place we were staying and hiding. But we ran out of food, and we didn't have the freedom, you know, to go outside and to just buy a piece of bread and a bottle of water, you know.
Wow.
And but perhaps we had so much money in that time that we could have bought all the food in the city. But so there's a lot of contradictions that sadly are not shown in those kind of series, and that's how you will educate in the wrong way the youngest audience, because I received many messages from the social media, and some of them or most of them, they are always like the same, saying that, hey, I just watch, you know, your dad's series and I want to be like him. I like him very much. I like what he did. I want that kind of life. And I can tell to those guys, hey man, you don't know what you're talking about, you know. And not even Pablo Escobar, with his own intelligence and he was a strong man, he couldn't survive such a thing. And just analyze the rest of the leaders, the other cartels. What's the end for them? They are all dead and they are all in prison. You know, the ones that survived, and none of them could enjoy anything. So they were working as slaves for someone else. I'm not saying who was that someone else, but everybody knows. So because at the end of this, you know, all this kind of money comes back to the most of the authorities. So what's the point of, you know, dealing with such a business if the end for you will be prison or even, you know, death?
So we can say somehow that money doesn't make you necessarily happy. Money
Absolutely.
doesn't make you necessarily successful. Money doesn't give you necessarily safe or will not provide you with safety, and money will not give you happiness.
Absolutely. I'm totally agree with you. And, you know, what's more important? How about freedom? You know, now that we are all in quarantine, nobody can get out of their own homes. You know, that's the only way to have a real value of, you know, how much will you pay as a human being just for feeling free. You know, my father, he had a lot of money, but not even all of his money could have bought his own freedom. And at the end, it even financed his own death, because that was exactly what bring him all the troubles. So, you know, I was perhaps having a lot of money and a lot of toys, but I couldn't enjoy any of them. You know, perhaps we had many houses, mansions, you know, yes, helicopters, airplanes, whatever, even a zoo, but we couldn't enjoy anything of that. We were hiding, we were always on the run, just everybody wanted to kill us. So what's the point of, having that kind of life? It only looks good on Narcos. That's it. And that's a show. And that's for entertainment purposes. And I'm not against, that companies can tell these kind of stories and share this to the public, but I am against if they are doing this in a way that they know perfectly well that they are encouraging the youngest audience to follow this kind of criminals. And that's not good for society. I had the chance more than anyone in the world to be Pablo Escobar 2.0. And I'm not that kind of guy because I'm very aware of the consequences of his violence. Why is that? Because being the son of, that brings you, brings a lot of attention from the enemies, the enemy side. Why? Because my father used to commit a lot of terrorist attacks, against the Colombian government, the police, a lot of people. So they understood that the only way they could harm my father was attacking his son. That's why sometimes I had to run faster than he was running away. And I had to hide more than him. So I know exactly, and I know perfectly well that I had the chance to be like him. And when he passed away, minutes after that, I sadly I said some threats against the country. And I'm not happy for doing that. I'm not proud of doing that. It took me like 10 minutes after those moments to realize that there was no purpose, no real purpose behind, trying to avenge my father's death, because that wouldn't bring me alive. And so, and will leave my family, my son, and all my people a lot of violence. The same violence that I have the chance to talk about with him, and to say to him and to ask him to stop, but he never listened. I had the chance. We had a lot of trust between us, and I had the chance to talk with him about the terrorist attacks and everything that he was doing. And I was against that, but he was surrounded by a bunch of men that was always applauding him, saying, "Hey, go ahead, Patron, you're the man." So he was like in the wrong path for sure.
My friend, your message is so strong, so powerful. You have been maybe in all Latin American countries. I'm sure you have been in a lot of countries of Europe also. I'm
Yes.
sure you visit the Middle East. Have you ever been in Qatar?
Yes, and last November I had the honor of being there. It's a
Oh,
beautiful
nice.
place. I went to Doha, so I stayed there, sadly for like 2 days, no more than that. And I want to come back for sure, of course. I have the opportunity to give some lectures from some businessmen over there. So, and even in the whole area too, in some other countries nearby. So I was very, very surprised of how my father is seen and remembered in that part of the world. And that's the kind of message that I want to leave. I can understand that my father calls a lot of attention. It's a story about passion. It's a story about violence. It's a story about terrorism, about trying to be successful in life, etc. And apparently being successful. And that's the way, and that's how I approach with a lot of respect to the people who invited me, to tell them and to explain them, look, thank you for inviting me, but my father wasn't a success case, and let me show you why I believe this. And this is how we can grow up with the conversation, with respect. And perhaps one of the things that we have to learn from his story is that he showed us the path we should not take. So this is a story to be told. This is a story to be analyzed, and we can learn a lot of things for the future, for the present, for today, and for tomorrow. So people and the youngest audience, we understand that Pablo Escobar could be my father, and I love him very much because I was raised in a culture that prays you have to honor your mother and your father. So I have to find a very thin line to walk you know, and I have to show the same respect for my father, and I have to show the same respect for my father's victims, the one that I met, and the one that I want to meet, because I never had the chance to meet them all. But I'm in the process of, you know, forgiveness and reconciliation, and I took moral responsibility for my father's crimes, and this is how I approach to my father's victims to ask them for forgiveness, because this is the only way we could heal, and I'm not asking them to forget. That's a very different thing. And the process has been very successful. I can tell you that, thank God, you know, there's like 100% success in every single case that I had, and I already spoke with more than 150 families, all of them direct victims of violence. So there's a lot of hope.
Qatar is my home right now. And as we said in Qatar, we hope we can have you soon visiting us again in Qatar, inshallah. So
Excellent.
presenting your books, we have an amazing Doha book fair in Qatar. It's international. I'm sure we have a very strong people now joining us in this talk. So inshallah, you will be with us very soon. And
thank you.
Well, the last, I think, Juan Pablo, if you are agreed, the last 15 minutes, maybe we can take it for some questions, right? So I have received some questions from some friends around the world. So I will start with, as you can imagine, all the questions are for you, of course. So I will just read it.
Tell me about your, now you're a writer, 2 books, and I would like to hear a little bit about that too.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You are really honor me. Thank you so much. But the first question is from Global Shapers Doha, the group we are doing our collaboration right now. And they said the first question, how you can find inspiration from you, and what is your advice to Doha Shapers?
Well, if you look at my story and my father's story, there's nothing positive, you know, and it's very hard to do positive things with such a negative story behind you. And this requires a big effort to me, you know. I have to look deep in my heart to find the reasons why, if we have suffer, and even if my father make a lot of people suffer his own violence, how could we find very positive things inside of those crimes and sad stories? And the only way I could find, you know, to do that, it was like trying to tell and to show my father's story with the highest respect and responsibility. And this is 2 words, respect and responsibility, that we have to take in account for every single actions we have in mind. So I think that's the only way to do it. And when you have the possibility to be a writer and to have a clean paper in front of you, and you are willing to tell your own stories, is because you are willing to discover your own demons and, you know, share your own sins and your own thoughts, and that's a way of healing, and that's a way of learning from the past. So how I did it and why is, I think there was a lot of love inside of my own family. Even if my father was Pablo Escobar, he was like 2 different kinds of men. You know, he was one inside with us at home, and he was another guy outside. So it was a big challenge for me to find inspiration in such negative stories. But as I tell in my book, you know, I think that my father showed us the path we should not take. And we have a lot of things to learn from that.
Amazing. We have another question from our dear friend and my university professor from Panama. I am lawyer. She is my professor, one of the best, by the way. Belkis Saez, that she has also an education page focused on students, professors, social workers, psychiatrists, and they face violence problems in this page. So she's asking, in your opinion, which are the best tools to keep our youth away from violence?
Well, for me, there's only one tool, and it's or two. It's education and love. You know, this we have been trying to put an end to the drug trafficking business in the world because we declare war on drugs. And look how we are today in Latin America and in the whole world. Today we have twice the amount of land used to grow coca leaves than we have in my father's best times in the 80s. So nobody could say that it that everything's going very well. You know, at the contrary, perhaps you don't hear too many Pablo Escobar in today's world, but because they learned from this story, because they knew that if you became such a public figure, that's not going to be good for that kind of business. And I believe that education is the only way out, you know, because if we are very aware of consequences of being part of these criminal organizations, if we are well educated, we can avoid, you know, to feel tempted to do drugs. And I had many conversations with my father, and I have to say that this is why I defend so much the power of education. First of all, it's cheaper than war. You know, if you educate well your kids, you don't have to put them in jail once they became as men. So we have to use education as a very powerful weapon to transform society, and it will cost us less than half of the money that is costing, you know, this stupid war that is not going to take us anywhere, because we have to think about the possibility of declaring peace to drugs and to learn how to survive them and how to deal with them and how to have, you know, everybody well educated, and so everybody will say no thank you, because, you know, there's no myth behind that, and there's a big propaganda that, you know, brings a lot of attention from everybody in the world that wants to try something that is prohibited. So I believe that, of course, it's a very big thing to discuss. Just to answer, but I truly believe that education is the best way to portray this. And my father educated me very well in terms of, thanks to that conversation, you know, I never felt tempted for that. So, and I was surrounded, you know, every single friend